Welcome to episode 137 of the Microsoft Cloud IT Pro podcast, recorded live August 6, 2019. This is a show about Office 365 and Azure from the perspective of IT pros and end users, where we discuss a topic or recent news and how it relates to you. In today's episode, we dive into the latest Azure and Office 365 news, including the public preview of Azure Dedicated Host, the announced end of life of Skype for Business Online, and private channels in Microsoft Teams.
This is recording. Are all your things recording? Can we use AI to record our podcast for us?
Ooh, if only.
Wouldn't that be nifty? Feed a bunch of RSS feeds into an AI bot thing and have it pull out relevant information and record a podcast.
You can probably do it. There's things you can feed the feeds into, and they give you like the summaries and the snippets and everything.
Probably. I'll let you work on that.
You going to do it in the Siri voice, or do we re-record Ben's voice? How's that work?
I don't know. I don't know that I want to hear a machine-generated version of my voice. Or maybe I do. Maybe it would be better. Or what voice do people pay the most attention to? We probably better not say that, or we might get labeled as racist or sexist or something else.
Generally, you ignore whatever sounds like your parents, so whatever the opposite of that is.
What about your wife? How does it compare if it's your wife versus your parents?
No comment.
Oh, I don't know what voice I listen to the best. Probably my own. The voices in my head.
And there you have it.
All right. So should we actually get into topics? Oh, I do have news. Well, not news. There's another Collab 365 conference coming out that I'm doing on SharePoint in September, yeah.
They're cranking those things out.
They are. They just keep coming, which means I just have to keep recording videos. So yeah, if you want to go sign up for that one, I'm doing a PowerShell. Like, I think it's getting started with PowerShell for SharePoint Online. Is the session I'm doing. So there's a whole bunch of SharePoint ones. There's some dev ones, some IT pro ones. This one's longer. They're doing 3 days for this one. So we'll put a link in the show notes if you want to go register for it. Check it out. They've done Teams, Flow, Power Apps, now SharePoint. I'm trying to get Mark to do like an all-inclusive, like not necessarily all-inclusive, but you know how we've talked about Office 365 as kind of that, at that umbrella layer, where there's a bunch of Office 365 stuff that doesn't really fall into a particular product? I'm talking with Mark.
Yeah, there's just a little bit of stuff in there.
Yeah, just a few things that we need to do, like an Office 365 virtual summit, not just all these pillars kind of in Office 365, so people can understand fundamentally what Office 365 is. So we'll see. Maybe that one will be coming eventually. But with that, do you want to dive into some news? We haven't done a news episode in a little while, I don't think. I can't remember. I'm losing track of what we've done and what we haven't done.
It's so nice to work with you sometimes.
I'm just kind of all over the place.
Here, there, everywhere.
Everywhere. That's what happens when you have 4 kids. You just kind of become scatterbrained.
Is that what it is? We're blaming the kids.
I think that's what it is. I'm blaming the kids. Lack of sleep. Not enough coffee yet this morning. Too much coffee. Could be anything. When it comes to email, Outlook and Office 365 are fantastic. But sometimes there are things you'd like to do that aren't implemented. Sperry Software creates Outlook add-ins and Office 365 services that fill in these gaps. For instance, there are Outlook add-ins to automatically print emails and or attachments, save emails to PDF, send out recurring emails, or how about a warning when you're going to do a reply to all instead of a normal reply? Find these and many more email productivity solutions. Get started today by visiting www.sperrysoftware.com/cloudit. So, with that, back to news.
Yeah, we can talk about some stuff that's happened. Where do you want to start? What do you want to get into?
I don't know. I've been just kind of rambling. Do you want to start? Maybe you can get me back on track if you start with some news that you've pulled out that looked interesting.
Yeah.
Or you can pick one of my news articles. Just pick a news article and let me shut up.
Oh, well, let's get the easy stuff out of the way, because I feel like you're going to rant with some of your stuff. There's been a couple of announcements on the Azure side of the house, which are actually pretty exciting depending on where you sit and what you do. If you're maybe a private organization or your MSP and what that looks like for you. So one of the bigger ones is probably dedicated hosts, and that all coming to public preview. So it's out of preview and kicking around now for customers to take advantage of. So in Azure land, we really haven't had a concept of a dedicated unit of compute to customers. You certainly had privatized units of compute, right? It's all multi-tenant. You could do pre-allocated capacity, maybe in the form of like an app service environment, things like that, but not too much that you could do for your VMs. And what Microsoft has done, and it's clearly a compete to other cloud providers like Amazon, who have had this capability for a while, you can come in and do what's called Azure Dedicated Host, where you get a single tenant physical server. So a server in a data center that is dedicated to just you as a customer. You're going to pay for that privilege. And then you can run your virtual machines on it. So effectively, you go ahead, pick your host, and then you just go ahead and run maybe like your D series, your M series, your F series, kind of whatever you want to run up with in that environment, which is kind of nifty and kind of nice. And I think this will enable potentially some other functionality downstream later. Like you think like, hey, a dedicated host sounds good. Yes, and in and of itself, that's probably pretty cool, especially if you need it for compliance purposes or you're just looking to manage a little bit more of that yourself. But you're still in an OpEx model. So, you're kind of paying every day. I'd be willing to bet, though, that over time, at least I would hope somebody at Microsoft's looking at it this way, what if they could put you into a CapEx model as well? So if you think about a lot of customers, maybe like government customers that, just based on the way they get their funding from Congress, like here in the US, they can't actually buy things in OpEx. Well, wouldn't it be nice if you could buy Azure in a CapEx model? And you might eventually be able to do that with offerings like this, or as they start to align more up.
Interesting. It's almost like
I'm not saying you can today. I'm just saying, that'd be really cool if you could get there, because now you're actually kind of sort of leasing hardware within the data center.
I was going to say, this is almost like just colo of a server in Microsoft's data centers, only you have to pick one of the servers they have for you. Because you're essentially paying for a physical server.
Yes, and then you have all the orchestration on top. You have that whole layer with ARM and the APIs and everything else that comes with it. So it's not just that you're picking like a size or anything like that, like a big host size. You're actually picking maybe licensing models that are going to align to the VMs on there. So when we think about like maybe like your A-Hub licensing, like your hybrid use, how are you going to license potentially SQL Server workloads that run on there? Like, what does all that look like for you? I think that starts to come together in some interesting ways.
Got it. So when you look at these, like I'm looking through these, so they have different dedicated host types that you can pick. And then they say, if you want to run this D series, like the D2S V3, you can run 32 of them on a type 1. So they kind of have it all categorized out for you, how much of each of the VMs you can run on these different types, because obviously, then if you're doing a dedicated host, you're not really having unlimited cores and CPUs that you can expand to, because eventually your dedicated host is going to run out of resources.
Yes, you are responsible for resource allocation in this model. So it is certainly pretty big consideration for you for how that comes together. But if you have workloads that require it, like if that is potentially the compliance need, maybe there are savings there for you, depending on kind of how you approach it and how you look at it from a licensing side of things. So it could be compliance, regulatory, could be costing, whatever it is. You start to get some more flexibility. And then, of course, you can mix and match this, right? You can bring this together and maybe put it side by side with some of those other burstable services that you have. So you're probably not going to want to run like really big VM scale sets on top of this. But if you have those single-use dedicated things that are going to run for the next year, 3 years, whatever it is, it could be a good option for you. And then you even get other options within there too. Like when you're provisioning a host, you can choose whether does it automatically get replaced and your workloads get migrated if the host ever fails? Like what does that look like for you? Like how isolated do you really want to be from a compute perspective? So where your compute sits in the data center. It's not from a network isolation. Like you still got to do network security groups and firewalls and all those kinds of things.
Yeah, and I know I've talked to companies before where they would need this for compliance. There's at least one company I know of in Jacksonville where they have different business segments, and by law, they're required that their business segments not share the same hardware, which has always prevented them from going to the cloud because, like you said, you go spin up a VM, you can't guarantee that business segment A is not using the same hardware that business segment B is, but something like this dedicated host, then you would be assured that, hey, business segment A is using this dedicated host, business segment B is using this dedicated host. They're never going to share the same hardware if you make sure you configure all that right, leveraging this.
Ooh.
Is my understanding, right?
So certainly that would be a way to do it, not to muddy the waters too much, but there actually is an offering, again, kind of sitting out there in, I believe it's in preview now. It's called Proximity Placement Groups, where you can actually co-locate Azure resources.
Okay.
So think maybe like network close, latency, even like physical distance between virtual machines.
Yep.
So if you're deploying into a single region, kind of single zone, single data center, you do have the ability to go ahead and put them in what's called this placement group. It's a logical grouping for VMs. So you can have this kind of boundary or constraint around deployment in where your virtual machines go. So if VMs are in a placement group, they're going to go into the same data center and to a certain degree, depending on how you've configured them, potentially the same rack and things like that evenly. So I think you're starting to get more and more options within there to make some of that happen. But certainly dedicated hosts would be like, hey, this is just an all-up way to make that happen.
Interesting. I hadn't heard of that other service. Time to go do some more reading. I mean, there's just a few services in Azure to keep track of, right? A few features here and there.
Just one or two. Yeah.
Just a couple. As IT professionals in the cloud era, sometimes it feels like we don't speak the same language as the rest of the organization. So when stakeholders from finance or other departments start asking about a specific project or team's Azure costs, they don't always realize how much work is involved in obtaining that information, sifting through cluttered CSVs and a complex mess of metadata in order to manually create custom views and reports. It's a real headache. On top of helping you understand and reduce your organization's overall Azure spend, ShareGate Overcast lets you group resources into meaningful cost hubs and map them to real-world business scenarios. This way, you can track costs in the way that makes most sense with your corporate structure, whether it's by product, business unit, team, or otherwise. It's a flexible, intuitive, and business-friendly way of tracking Azure infrastructure costs, and it's only available in ShareGate Overcast. Find out more on sharegate.com/ITPro. All right, so another news announcement. Now it's my turn, then you can go back to Azure. We all knew this one was coming. We did not know when, up until, maybe a week ago or so, a few days ago. I can't remember when I actually saw this. And Skype for Business Online is going to be retired in 2021, July 31 of 2021. So from the time of recording, that gives you approximately 2 years to migrate off of Skype for Business Online and go entirely to Teams. Personally, I think it's a good one. I'm tired of having both of them, and you have the whole islands and interop and migrations. It's good. I'm glad Microsoft is giving people 2 years to do it, because I'm guessing this is going to turn into a fair amount of work for some people. I know some organizations right now just going to Office 365 and they're going to Skype for Business because they're not ready to bite off all of Teams yet. So fortunately, they have 2 years to make that migration happen. I know there's some features too that they need to get over from Skype for Business yet into Teams before it's kind of that full functionality.
What are you talking about? They're at feature parity. They've been at feature parity for a year, Ben.
Let's not talk about that. That's a secret.
This wasn't even the one I thought you were going to rant about, but let's do it.
You turned this into a rant. I was not going to rant. I was just going to say there's some features they need to get there. I was going to leave it at that. No more ranting.
Well,
All done with my rants. No, this one I am actually excited about. I'm good that there's finally a date that we're not going to have these running side by side for too much longer. I mean, 2 years is still a significant amount of time, but again, I know there's a lot of companies that this will be some work for them in the next couple of years. You get some of those big companies that are on Skype for Business. It's a big change. And kind of like we've talked about with Teams, there's a lot more in Teams because it's more of that wrapper, that combination of a bunch of Office 365 services. So you need to make sure other workloads are there. You have to start thinking now about SharePoint and Exchange Online and all those other things if you're going to go to Teams. So there's a lot of planning, a lot of thinking that is going to go into this. So you do have a couple years to go through all of that, to get your users educated on Teams, and to get all of that moved over before Skype for Business Online is retired on July 31 of 2021.
One of the interesting things here is when you start to go through some of the announcements, it sounded like Microsoft was going to proactively start reaching out to customers and saying like, hey, did you know you're still doing this? Is there any way we can potentially point you to documentation, get you moving along, nudge, nudge, which having been through some past retirements with products in Office 365, they haven't really done that. But this seems to be enough of a cornerstone service that they're trying to really get people over to Teams and the new way of doing things.
Right. Well, do you think part of that, I mean, Microsoft cares about consumption. We know that. They want you to consume services. A lot of things get measured based on consumption. Let's face it, once you're in Teams, you're going to start consuming a lot more 365 services just by nature of Teams than you would if you're in Skype for Business. So by helping companies get into Teams, you're also helping them get into SharePoint, into Exchange Online, into Planner, into all of those other Office 365 services because they all kind of bubble up into that Teams interface. So it's going to help the usage numbers as well of all those other Office 365 services.
Oh, certainly. I don't think that's to be discounted that you're going to consume more. I also think it's that when you put these lines in the sand, sometimes, customers go beyond that, or at least in on-prem land. Like, how many places do you still run into that are running Windows 2000 or Windows XP or 2003 workloads like that? You still see it and you still run into it.
Very true.
For sure. And it's an enabler because even though you really, 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 really should not be, you still do. And you can't do that when somebody physically pulls the plug and it's yanked out from underneath you.
That is true. That's a good point because there's going to be people that it's going to hit July 31, 2021, and they're going to be asking what happened or thinking Microsoft's going to extend the deadline or something like that, which they may, but you shouldn't count on it. You should start planning this now, especially if you're a larger company. I mean, 5, 10, 15 people companies, probably not going to be a big deal. When you start talking thousands and thousands of employees, if you're on Skype for Business Online, it's probably going to be a bit more work.
Yeah, just a little bit here or there. I certainly think it'll keep Fast Track busy.
Yes.
It is one of those things, like if you're a customer and you are eligible for Fast Track and you have not reached out to those teams, hey, it's kind of free stuff that you already paid for that's sitting out there. So you should definitely consider that and get ready to get there. And if this is the first time you've heard of Fast Track and you're going, what is Fast Track? Go click on the site and see if you're eligible because you might have enablement or onboarding or migration services that are freely available to you from Microsoft for M365, O365, Azure, and Dynamics 365. At no cost. Did I mention that part? Like you already paid for it. It's built in.
Yeah, it's nice. I'm working with a few clients, a couple. I have 2 or 3 right now that are leveraging Fast Track as well. And from what I've seen, the Fast Track people do tend to be knowledgeable. They have access to product teams. They can go ask questions, find answers. Definitely something, if you qualify for, it's worth taking a look at.
Yeah, I've gone through a couple of Fast Track implementations for Office 365, and they're pretty good over there. I do believe it's different teams for Office 365 and like different functional groups within Microsoft for Azure and Dynamics and M365. So they all approach things slightly differently. Some can go hands-on keyboard, some can't be hands-on keyboard. Like a migration team has to have access to your environment, right? To kind of run you through the migration factory, move your mailboxes, your OneDrives, things like that.
Right. Although what I've seen is they're hands-off keyboard. They will talk you through it and they'll walk you through it, but they won't actually do it, which is actually where I've started helping out a lot of clients is it's like, I can get into your environment, I can get on your servers, I can actually do the clicking and the migrating for you. Fast Track, from what I've seen, at least with SharePoint, tends to be a lot more advisory than getting in and doing the clicking and the actual migration itself.
I think there's a couple, and I might be wrong, but I thought there was a couple that they could do the clicks for, and it was specifically with migrations. So for OneDrive for Business and for mailboxes.
Got it. Maybe they can, or maybe it depends on the fast track team. But even to your point, it varies too within M365 or O365 because they have SharePoint fast track people, they have Exchange fast track people, teams, so they all can talk together and pull each other in. But yeah, it's definitely interesting, but can be very helpful. Anywho. Opsgility is disrupting cloud training as we know it with their on-demand platform, Skill Me Up. Their new design focuses on a user flow to better support role-based learning paths with these great new features. Real-time, hands-on labs are now included with each subscription to build your skills competence. Hundreds of cloud courses with more added daily to transform your skills for today's cloud-first careers. Role-based learning paths guide you through associated level courses in an easy-to-view layout and tracker. Microsoft Azure and Microsoft 365 certification prep courses and labs to support you leading up to exam day. Learn more and start your free 3-day trial at www.skillmeup.com.
All right, you ready since you brought up Teams?
Are you going to go rant? I am trying not to rant. You're portraying me as the ranty one.
I'm not going to rant.
Okay, we're not ranting.
No, I want to see if I can get you to. So, private channels.
Private channels.
Secure private channels. I'm sorry. Let me make sure I have what I'm talking about right.
It's rolling out soon. September of 2019, coming to a Teams tenant near you. You will have private channels. I'm going to stop there so I don't rant.
Oh, come on.
So this is people have been asking for this for a while. We have talked about this before, so I'm not going to rant too much because if you've been listening to us for a while, you know some of what my questions are around this. But this is allowing secure collaboration among a subset of a team by really locking down these private channels. There are a few conditions here that they outline in the message. So this is a message that came through the Message Center. It is tied to a roadmap ID that we can link to in the show notes. But team owners will be able to see all the private channels in a team. So think of it like if you're in SharePoint land, like a site collection admin, that no matter what you did with the permissions, they could still see everything. Same thing with Teams. No matter what you do with the permissions, private channels, secure channels, team owners always be able to see everything. And then team members will only see those private channels that they may have been added to. So you can take your team members, add them, remove them from different channels, and it will lock down those channels to only these team members. What they really haven't talked about yet, and the biggest thing that we've talked about before that I'm curious to see is how this works out with Office 365 groups and securing things like, does this mean you're going to be able to secure Planner and Stream and Power BI and all those other services that you add to a channel? Or is it just going to be the files and the chats? And how this all relates to groups and how they handle security on the background is the biggest part I'm curious to see, and how that gets managed with all those other services. Because like we said, Teams is that roll-up of a bunch of services. And in the past, it's always been like a 1-to-1 ratio with an Office 365 group, which is that membership for the security. I just want to see how this is going to happen. So they do say they're going to gradually start rolling this out in early September, and they're going to have it complete worldwide by the end of September. So this should be a really quick rollout, if all goes according to plan, over the course of September, right before Ignite hits. More or less, because Ignite's in November this year.
I'm waiting for the official support documentation to be updated. So for a while now, and it's still this way today, when you go to the Create a Private Channel in Teams support page, it just says, we don't currently have private channels, but we're working on it. To keep things private in the meantime, you can create a new team and invite a more select audience.
I think it's the roadmap. Or no, it was the Message Center. They always had the additional information in the Message Center. If you click on the additional information in the Message Center, it takes you out to a link for Teams policy settings. And they have like a brief 1 paragraph in here about private channels are coming, but it doesn't give you any new information. And it's just kind of an odd place to link you out to is those Teams policies and not to some security setting page.
We'll see where it all ends up being. I mean, I'd be interested to get my hands on it just to even see if how they're handling some of that permissioning between, like you said, maybe Planner versus another underlying workload. Like, heck, how are they going to do permissions for files? Like, SharePoint permissions are hard to begin with, no matter what people say. I still think they're hard.
Broken inheritance on folders.
Well, are you going to break inheritance, or are you going to have a new underlying site collection, like per channel? Because that'd be a way to do it too, right? Is just blow it out and say, well, here's this site collection thing. But then it's just more sprawl and other stuff to manage. No matter how you do it, it's going to be sprawl someplace. It's going to be sprawl in the number of sites you have. It's going to be sprawl on the permissions front, all over the place. And I'm not arguing whether it's a need or not a need within the product, right? Like, I get competing products do it, and you might have this need within your organization to have it. Like, that's all well and good. But the implementation details for this one will be super sticky because it wasn't built with that in mind, clearly.
That's my biggest thing too. Just like you, do you need it? Do you not need it? I'm not going to argue that one. I'm really curious to see how that underlying structure works out. Maybe it's subsites. Maybe they do a subsite under the site collection. We're going to bring subsites back.
Oh, come on. We were just finally getting into hub before you sub, and now we got to go back the other way.
Subsite for every channel? I don't know. That might make it a little easier. It still begs the question about the grouping and all the other services.
Well, I mean, that's just the file storage part. What about chats? Because your chats are someplace else, and then you got this piece. How do you do the email address for that private channel? What does that look like? And how does that come through? And how is that truly private? And lots and lots and lots of stuff.
I have it. Embedded Office 365 groups. An Office 365 group in an Office 365 group. You have your parent group for team, and then subgroups for all your channels. And you can put them in each other.
There's that. And I don't know, if I was truly like a betting person, I would say we should put money down and see whether they give you a mechanism to migrate existing channels that you wanted to be private but couldn't be private because you didn't have that functionality over to a private channel. Right? Because I could see a lot of organizations are going to struggle there too.
Right.
You didn't have this capability for the last 2 years, give or take. So now that you have it, you're going to want to do some consolidation and cleanup.
Or did you have a team that was private that you really wanted as a channel but couldn't because it needed to be private? You would now want to migrate a team to a private channel.
Ooh, so many questions. I can't wait.
We could get in trouble for that. I was going to say we could start like a whole pool and put money down on all these things, but I don't know if that violates some type of terms of service. So we will not create any betting pools on our podcast.
All right, fine.
Any other news you want to talk about?
That probably does it for today since we're almost out of time.
All right, sounds good. We'll wrap it up and we can go get to our normal work. And, one last blurb, if you're still listening, if you haven't tuned out yet, you will still have time. This comes out on Thursday. You will still have, I think, 3 days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, if you still want to get submissions in for Ignite for those community sessions. They extended the deadline a week. So from the time you hear this, you'll have like 3 days. If you were thinking about it, if you listen to the episode we had with Anna, you'll still have a few more days now until the 11th of August. Okay, now we can wrap it up. I'm done.
All right. Thanks, Ben.
All right. Thanks, Scott. If you enjoyed the podcast, go leave us a 5-star rating in iTunes. It helps to get the word out so more IT pros can learn about Office 365 and Azure. If you have any questions you want us to address on the show or feedback about the show, feel free to reach out via our website, Twitter, or Facebook. Thanks again for listening and have a great day.